Hello everyone, welcome back, or thank you for watching if you're new. I've decided to make a series where I do makeup based on folklore creatures while I tell you the history and lore behind said creature. Today I've chosen to tell you about vampires, and I did a lot of research on history, alleged sightings, modern day vampires, New Orleans specifically, and more. So grab a snack if you need, or maybe don't, because some of this is rather grisly, but let's get into it. So, from what I could find in history, the first ever well-documented and officially recorded case of a staking was that of a Serbian man named Petar Blakojevic. And please forgive my pronunciation, I am trying my best to pronounce everything right, but some of these names I know I'm butchering. But back to the case, his death in 1725 was what sparked the vampire panic, though his own cause of death was unknown, at least at the time. And the story goes that after he died, multiple people in the village began dying mysteriously as well. On the 8th day, 9 people had already passed away, all of which claiming on their deathbed that Petar had visited them in the middle of the night and attacked. This is what led to the village people exhuming his body from the grave, only to discover he was not decomposing at the rate they had expected. But there was also blood all over his mouth, which, to the people, confirmed their greatest fear and suspicion. They had a vampire on their hands. It is said that they then drove a stake through his remains. So, today we do know that many of the mysterious deaths that were contributed to being vampire attacks were actually caused by outbreaks of disease like consumption, better known today as tuberculosis. But what exactly were people so afraid of? It begs the question, what was a vampire? Vampire myths and legends can be found from all over the world. Specifically, in Eastern European countries, vampire stories spread like wildfire in the 18th and 19th century. A vampire itself was thought to be an evil spirit that had possessed a deceased person's body and caused them to become the living dead. It was thought that in the night, these vampires would escape their graves and prey on loved ones or neighbors, either drinking their blood or sucking their life force energy. At the time to combat this, iron stakes were used along with rocks or bricks in the mouth of the deceased. In recent years, archaeologists have found remains buried with iron poles driven through them, chains and locks tied around them, and in some cases, iron cages have also been found encasing the remains as well. But back then, when it was first suspected a deceased person had become a vampire, the village people did a bunch of different rituals to combat this. It was seen that they would burn the remains, use decapitation or dismemberment, and sometimes even the ashes or the pieces of the deceased burnt heart would be fed to those who were ill, believing it would protect them from the vampire. And a little spoiler here, but that didn't work. Though, of course, throughout legend, many things have been said to weaken vampires, like garlic and the sun. The reason for the belief that garlic could protect you from vampires comes from the fact that in Transylvania and the Balkans, garlic was believed to ward away evil spirits. And while vampires have always been seen as nocturnal creatures, the myth that they burn in the sun didn't appear until the 1920s, when the silent film Nosferatu was released. With that being said, vampire lore does go even further back than the first documented staking or a silent film. The earliest accounts I could find come from Poland and Russia in the 1690s, where sightings of vampire-like creatures were recorded in journals. These creatures were described to suck the blood of both humans and animals alike. Once full, it is said that blood would continuously pour from their eyes and every pore in their body, which is quite disturbing if I do say so myself. But I still couldn't help but wonder how far it went, if it went back even further than that. I found an interesting passage in the book of Enoch, in which it describes angels known as the Watchers. The Watchers were supposedly sent to watch over humanity, but fell from grace when they began lusting over and sleeping with human women, who did later fall pregnant. These women gave birth to what is known as the Nephilim. I found a few different translations of a certain verse mentioning the Nephilim and blood drinking, which is why some people do believe that the Nephilim could have been like vampires. But in the verses that I found, they all had the same meaning, even if it was worded slightly differently. So here is a direct quote from the Book of Enoch, chapter 3, verse 9 through 10. "The giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood." End quote. I'd like to note that the Book of Enoch was written BCE, so I am led to believe that this would be the earliest account of a not fully human entity that drank blood. Though this wouldn't be a video about vampires if I didn't talk about the other place in the world that is still today heavily associated with vampires and vampirism. And that is none other than New Orleans, Louisiana. And let me tell you, New Orleans does not lack vampire legends and sightings. Though I do want to put a disclaimer here that I will be talking about multiple different legends, and many of them have very little historical evidence to back them up. But if you live anywhere near New Orleans, you know that fiction is often closer to fact here. New Orleans is a very haunted city in general. Vampires are just the icing on the cake. But to get into vampires specifically, the most famous tales from New Orleans are that of the Casket Girls in the old Ursuline convent, Count Saint-Germain, and the Carter brothers. I'm going to try to keep these as brief as possible since there's so much to talk about. But first up would be the Casket Girls. They were women sent by the King of France to the colony in Louisiana for the purpose of marriage and starting families as the colony was just budding. It is said that when these women arrived, they were very pale and sickly looking. Though we know that now this is probably from their long voyage, people were still skeptical. It is said that they were taken in and cared for by the nuns at the old Ursuline convent until they could marry. It is also said that each girl carried a small trunk with her, and some people believed that they carried vampires over from the old world in their luggage. Other people believe that the Casket Girls themselves were vampires. It wasn't long after they first arrived when the mortality rate of the city spiked, and people were mysteriously dying. This led to the Casket Girls being kicked out from the Ursuline convent. And when the nuns checked through their luggage, it said that the luggage was empty. Later, both the trunks and the windows were nailed shut with silver nails blessed by the Pope himself. Around 800 blessed nails were used and made of silver. The entire third-floor attic area of the Ursuline convent is completely off limits to the public. There is also another legend that in 1978, 2 paranormal investigators camped outside the convent and later did report strange unexplained noises and what seems to be a shadowy figure moving near the attic windows. Though it should be noted that this has never been verified. But y'all, in my personal opinion, I think there has to be a reason this attic has been shut for over 200 years. People don't just do that. But disregarding my opinion, I should also mention that rumors also circulated for many years after the Casket Girls incident that bodies were found drained of blood all over the New Orleans area. Some rumors even say that bodies were found outside under the windows of the convent itself. But I wanted to know who was thought to have been the first vampire in New Orleans. And that would be none other than Jacques Saint-Germain. I looked up how to say it. I'm probably still not saying it right. But legend goes that in 1902, a very wealthy man named Jacques moved from France to New Orleans, where he began throwing lavish parties for the city's elites at his home on Royal Street. It is said at these parties no one had ever seen him eat. He was only ever seen drinking what guests assumed to be wine from his glass. He was also said to be very charismatic and claimed to be a descendant of Count Saint-Germain, or Saint-Germain, or however you pronounce it. No disrespect intended, I promise. Anyways, he claimed to be related to the Count, who was a famed 18th century alchemist and adventurer. It was also rumored that he would recount historical events as if he had been there himself. so people began to become suspicious that he perhaps was the Count, even though the Count had been dead for years. But legend goes that it was a November day when an injured woman was found outside his home after jumping from the second-floor balcony. It was her claim that Jacques had invited her in, and when she was distracted, he had attacked her and bit her neck. Some sources claim that there was a knock on the door that had distracted him for long enough that she could get away, while other sources don't specify how exactly she escaped. But it all ends the same way, with her escaping, and the next day he was gone. Police later found blood stains all over his home and a number of wine bottles that had blood in them. Though this story is very interesting, I do have to note that there is no record of a wealthy man going by that name at the time, who was living in that area at least. Even so, people still claim to see him roaming the French Quarter at night to this day. Our last New Orleans vampire legend is the story of a pair of brothers known as John and Wayne Carter. And y'all, I really don't know what it is with vampires in Royal Street, but this also takes place near Royal Street in 1932. Rumor has it, a young girl was seen fleeing down Royal Street extremely panicked until she found a police officer. She quickly explained how she had been lured in and tied up in the home of two brothers, along with several other victims. They had been held captive so that the brothers could drink their blood. While the police officer didn't really believe her at first, he followed her back to the home on the corner of Royal Street and St. Anne. And I'm sure that officer was completely shocked to find 4 other victims exactly as the young girl had described them. Along with the 4 living captives, it was also said that there was an upwards of a dozen deceased bodies piled in the home as well. The living victims were found bound to chairs with blood-soaked bandages around their wrists. The girl explained that the brothers would leave early in the morning and return after dark. They would then reopen the wounds on the girl's wrists and collect the blood that spilled from them in a cup to drink. When the brothers returned that night, they were immediately arrested, and it is said that they also immediately confessed to their crimes. They directly told the cops that they were vampires and would kill again out of necessity if released, and asked to be killed. They had a trial and were convicted as serial killers and later executed, though it is said that their bodies disappeared from their crypt and were never found again. Sightings of the Carter brothers also went on for years after their supposed death, though there is no record of a trial like this ever happening. Though a lot of these legends aren't verifiable, plenty of people today have their own personal New Orleans stories of unexplained paranormal sightings. Outside of just New Orleans, there are also historical political figures that played a role in inspiring authors to write some of the most famous vampire characters like Dracula. It is commonly believed that Dracula was inspired by the Romanian leader Vlad the Impaler, who earned his nickname from the way he liked to kill his enemies, which was impaling them on a large wooden stake. Another historical figure would be that of Elizabeth Bathory, also known as the Blood Countess. She is believed to be responsible for torturing and murdering hundreds of young women, and was actually convicted of this during her time. She believed that the blood of young girls would keep her looking young and healthy. Some accounts even claim that she bathed in this blood, though that is not a verifiable piece of evidence, unlike her crimes, which did really happen. Another notable fact about her was that she was diagnosed with falling sickness, now known as epilepsy, when she was a child. Back then, it was believed that the cure for epilepsy was rubbing the blood of a non-epileptic person on your lips, so she was often doing that as a child, which I feel may have been the start of her many problems. But a lot of this is all from the past. What about today? What if vampires existed today? What would they be like? Like the monsters of folklore or sparkly Edward Cullen? Well, the people that claim to be real vampires would tell you that they are neither. While there is more information on this community of people than there used to be, it is still a bit elusive. I did my best to find some information though. Through my research, I found that there are 2 main groups or types of real vampires, which are also known as human vampires. These types are the sanguinarians, or blood drinkers, and the energy or psychic vampire. Though it should also be noted that today in many modern covens, it can be seen as taboo to drink blood. The people who live this lifestyle claim that it is not about an aesthetic, and it isn't really even a choice for them. Some have claimed to go into medical episodes or even need hospitalization if they don't consume the blood or energy that they need. While many might think that this group is a bunch of Twilight-crazed teenagers, this community is actually very old, with some semblances of it being found to have existed since at least the early to mid-1970s. Many people that do claim to be real or human vampires also do like to stress that everything they do is consensual and done with a donor, whether that be the exchange of energy or blood. During my research, I stumbled across a man named John Edgar Browning. He studied real vampires for 5 years and is known to be a vampire expert. He started his first 2-year study with vampires in New Orleans in 2009 during his doctoral studies at LSU. And he continued conducting research for several years in different places. I believe he is one of the big reasons we know so much about such an elusive community today. I would also like to note something a bit strange that I came across in my research on vampires in general. Not all that long ago, my mother was talking to me about vampires because she knows I have a bit of a hyperfixation, and she was mentioning how the Vatican, the Catholic Vatican, was keeping track of upwards of 50 vampires in New Orleans. And she was telling me about the article she had read on this. And I thought that was very interesting, but I didn't ask too many questions at the moment because we were watching a TV show. Later, during my research, I asked if she could pull that article up for me, only to find it had disappeared, along with any other mentions of this. Like, she said there were multiple articles she had seen about it when it, came out, and it's gone. So, I don't know, take that with a grain of salt, but I just thought that was very strange that there were at least some articles about it, whether it was true or not, and that I can find and she can find literally nothing mentioning it now. It's totally possible that I just missed it in my research, but I thought it was strange and something to note. Well, all in all, this was a very interesting deep dive, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I was thinking of possibly doing sirens next for this series, so I would love if you could drop a follow if you're interested in watching that, and thank you so much for watching and spending nearly 18 minutes with me. I have my sources cited in the description if anyone's interested in doing a little bit of their own research, and if you have any paranormal creature sighting personal stories, you can feel free to send them to me on my Instagram DMs, and I would love to make a video reading people's paranormal experiences. I think that would be really cool. So, thank you again for watching. I had a lovely time telling you about vampires today.